I am Inka Larissa.
And I am Jennifer Rose.
Whisky Sisters, the podcast.
We're two whiskey pals serving a weekly whiskey podcast and rocking your whiskey world.
Exploring the whiskies and distilleries of the world and meeting amazing people along the way.
We'll be sticking our noses into our drams and all things whiskey.
So fill your whiskey glass and join the fun.
You're listening to Whisky Sisters.
In today's episode, we will be sampling Bowmore's core releases and chatting about all things rock music with our special guest.
Yes, the legendary Tom Russell, otherwise known as the Godfather of Rock, is in the house. How cool is that? We can certainly snag those guests and a half. For those of you that aren't aware, Tom is a radio presenter born and raised in Scotland. His amazing, epic, kick-ass broadcasting career began with Radio Clyde in 1981, where he hosted the long-running Friday night rock show that was fodder for the rockers of Scotland and beyond. And he again rocked the airwaves on Rock Radio 96.3, which I was obsessed with. This was broadcast in Glasgow and Central Scotland. Honestly, Inka, it got me through a tough job. I listened to every day. And he most recently worked for Rock Sport Radio and Real Radio XS Manchester. He has met all of the giant rock stars on the planet. We are so impressed by this. And he is still broadcasting 3 times a week on the Max, on DAB Radio, and online on maxradio.co.uk.
So before we chat with Tom, let's stick our noses into the latest whiskey news.
Stick your nose in it.
Waterford Distillery, the world's largest producer of organic and biodynamic whiskies, claims its 2 new releases are the most heavily peated whiskies to ever be created in Ireland. They say that these are more peated than most of the famous Islay expressions.
Oh, check them out.
Yeah. Measuring in at 57 and 74 ppm, the 2 whiskies called Peated Lacan and Peated Woodbrook use Irish peat to create smoky flavors, which occur when compounds released by the peat fires are used to dry malted barley. Usually 40 to 50 ppm is considered heavily peated, so they are quite heavily peated for sure. And honestly, also this Irish peat thing just made me think of your mom. Your mommy.
When she had her Irish peat but wouldn't burn it because it was so special to her.
I know. I feel like,
that's
next
so
Mother's Day, you should get a bottle of this.
Exactly. I should. She's heading off to Ireland soon on a trip, so she's like super happy. I wonder if she'll treat herself to some more peat.
Yeah.
Don't you feel this is a bit like, this is kind of like laying down the gauntlet or whatever the phrase is, just like our whiskey's peatier than yours. Do, 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 do. Like take that, Isla, a little bit.
Yeah, but I quite like it.
Yeah, peat wars.
Yeah. And both of these bottles are priced at around £90, so not too bad.
Scotch brand Gordon and MacPhail has added a 74-year-old single malt from Glenlivet Distillery to its private collection. Gordon and MacPhail 1949 from Glenlivet Distillery was laid down in a refill sherry butt on New Year's Day. Oh, that's pretty cool. 1949 and bottled on the 6th of March this year. Each bottle is priced at £35,000 US dollars. That's 43,000, and there are only 192 available for sale. It has an ABV of 49.3% and is said to have a sweet stewed fruit aroma that combine with cinnamon, aged leather, clementine, and beeswax polish. Whoa, that's like super freaking old.
Yeah, and the bottle looks like nice decanter rather than some weird creation that these older bottles usually come with.
Yeah. Do you think if whiskey had a consciousness, it would be like, what's even happening? We've been here for ages and nothing's happening to this barrel.
Yeah. Be so bored. Can't even get any more through into the wood or anything.
Yeah. I've been ready for years.
Chatting with all the other barrels.
Yeah, totally. Like an old wise barrel. They should do a kids' cartoon where all the barrels have personalities. But do you know what? See, nowadays you can't even, that would be seen as promoting alcohol to kids. Why can't you just do that and trust that, you know, we can drink responsibly as humans? But anyway, we digress, Inca.
Yeah, but I guess the kids won't be responsible. So
Yeah.
anyway, enough of the tramdom crap.
Never, Inca. Always with the random crap.
Scotch whisky producer Dalriata has become the second Campbeltown distillery in recent weeks to gain planning approval. We actually mentioned this before, some episodes before, when they were applying to get the permission. Dalriata submitted the planning application to build the distillery on the banks of Campbeltown Loch in August. Yeah, that's when it was. It has now been given the go-ahead from Argyll and Bute Council, which also approved Glasgow-based whisky bottler Brave New Spirits' proposal in August to build net zero single malt distillery in Campbeltown. Oh my God, it's a happening place again.
It so is.
Dalriata project, which represents an investment of £4.5 million, will feature a distillery, museum, visitor centre and retail outlet. The museum really confuses me. Like, what's in the museum?
When it's new.
Yeah.
Look at this artifact. Oh, 6 weeks ago, this bubble wrap was covering our new furniture.
Let's rock.
Okay, folks, let's get involved in the Bowmore experience. Bowmore is the first licensed Islay distillery, and it stood on the shores of Loch Dal, which is a sea loch opening out into the wild Atlantic Ocean since 1779. It's likely, however, that the then owner had been distilling in Bowmore since shortly after his arrival on Islay in 1766. The distillery passed through 4 owners before 1963 when it was bought by the Morrison family, who subsequently sold to the Japanese whiskey company Suntory in 1994, who also owns Laphroaig, as you may well know.
Unlike most distilleries, Bowmore still has its own malt barn. First, the raw barley is steeped for 27 hours in fresh water sourced from the nearby River Lagan. And then the soaked grains are spread out across the stone floors of the malt barn. And the maltman will turn the damp barley every 4 hours, day and night, using large wooden shovels. These are the guys who always get the monkey shoulder. Once it's ready, the barley, now called green malt because of the tiny shoots beginning to show, is taken to the kiln for drying. The floor malting actually counts only 40% of the distillery's needs, and it's mixed with malt from the mainland. And the floor malting always makes kind of nice story, I think, and a lot of distilleries, or like few distilleries still do it as well. Like when I was in Highland Park, for example, they have it, but they did say that they don't actually shovel it anymore so much. They had a little machine that turns the grains.
To save the shoulders, to save time, yeah?
Yeah, save the shoulders and save time.
Yeah, keep your shoulders for the dance floor action.
Exactly. And none of these distilleries you do all their malting on the floor. It's just like part of the production, so you can keep telling this story and the history of how it used to be done, I guess. All the whiskies matured a minimum of 9 years, and the distillery has a special place for some of the maturation to take place. It is known as number 1 vaults, and it has the most extraordinary microclimate. The vault is below the level of Loch Dal. One wall makes up to the town's seawall, creating a chill, damp environment, which is seen as ideal for long-term maturation.
That sounds kind of spooky, mysterious, clever, all at once.
Yeah, and very salty.
Indeed. Salty, salty. Let's invite our guest, our amazing guest, before we start sampling the core range.
Tom Russell.
Tom, thank you so much for joining us for some drams today and talking about whiskey and rock. That's are basically our two favorite things. So we are very excited to have you on.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, I'm extremely chuffed because I have been a massive fan of yours way back from the Friday night rock show days, and I was completely obsessed with rock radio when it was on. You were very civil when a tipsy me approached you at a couple of gigs back in those days, Tom. So it's lovely to speak to you again.
Was that tipsy as well?
I'm sure adult beverage had been taken.
I must put my hands up and say at that type of gig, I tended to be a Jack Daniels and Coke man because some of these bars and pubs and rock clubs, if you went up and asked for even a Glenfiddich, the barman would look at you as if you were daft. So I tended to go for Jack Daniels and Coke at that time.
Yeah, but
Absolutely.
JD and Coke is very rock and roll. I think a lot of the rockers seem to go for that.
Yeah, but I like to support the Scotch whiskey industry as much as possible.
Before we talk about whiskey, could you share with our listeners a little bit about your epic career as the Godfather of Rock? As we have heard that you've been interviewing many of our favorite bands, including Bon Jovi, which I love, Iron Maiden, Ozzy Osbourne, and Metallica.
We love Metallica.
Yeah.
Yes, I've been very fortunate in my career. There's not that many rock DJs working on the radio, but there's probably a lot more now. But certainly back in the late 70s, the 80s, the 90s, there was only a handful of us.
Yeah.
So when the big rock bands wanted a bit of exposure, it wasn't too difficult. The record companies would pick out maybe 4, 5, 6 of us to do the interviews, and that was great. It meant that we got the access to the artists. I think it'd be a lot more difficult now for some of the new radio presenters breaking through playing rock music because there's so many of us now.
Do you have a favorite interview or just, something that stands out?
It's a difficult one that I get asked that a lot. Possibly, I've had the pleasure of interviewing Ozzy Osbourne probably 8-10 times over the years. And
No way, as much as that.
I've been at a party at his house. In fact, I've been at 2 parties, one party and one barbecue at his house.
Oh my God, that's so cool.
He is the nicest guy. He is the funniest guy I've ever met. I've been lucky, again, to meet a lot of funny people, and Ozzy is just so funny. He just sits there and tells you stories, and he has your side sore with laughter. Slowing down a little bit nowadays, but
that's an amazing answer. I can't believe you've met him so much, and I was super gutted. I had tickets to see him in Glasgow this past June, but of course, as you say, slowing down a bit now, not understandably, not travelling far to tour, but I've never managed to kind of see him live. Hopefully I'll manage over to the States to see him, but he just is such a iconic figure, such a character. Now, you mentioned Glenfiddich and, not always been able to get the whiskies of your choice at gigs and things. Ink and I are quite often moaning that when we go to different rock and metal, like especially kind of bigger festivals, the selection of alcohol, it does not please our whiskey taste buds at all. Mm-hmm. But we wondered, have you always enjoyed whiskey, or is that something that's more recent? Maybe if you've got any favourite whiskies or any that you're keen to try?
It's a strange tale, but I'll tell it. My dad was a whiskey man. I'm an only child. My dad was a famous grouse and water. That was his drink.
Yeah.
But, as long as I remember, as I grew up, I tried it a couple of times, and how the smell, it takes a little bit of getting used to. So I was not a whiskey fan when I was a teenager or in my 20s, my 30s, my 40s. I was more a pint of heavy. Couple of pints of heavy, and I was content. And then probably early in the 2000s, at the time of rock radio, there was a small whiskey shop in Finnieston in Glasgow called Tam's Drams. And Tam's Drams used to advertise on the radio station, on rock radio. And after a few months of advertising, he was doing quite well. So the proprietor decided to have a whiskey tasting evening. And I was invited to go along as the compere. I wasn't going to speak about the whiskies. I wasn't an expert, but the owner of Tam's Drams was. So we had that evening, and it was a huge success. And early on in the evening, Tam said to me, basically what you've said to me, are you a whiskey man, Tom? And I said, well, no, not really. I'm a pint of heavy man, but my dad was famous grouse, but I've never really enjoyed it. I've tried it a couple of times, but I'm not really a fan. And he says, well, will you do me a favour? And he pulled out a bottle. I can't remember what it was, but it was a single malt, one of the ones that were having the tasting. And he poured a small dram, put in a tiny, tiny touch of water, swirled it around, and he says, right, Tom, do me a favour, just have a sniff of that. I had a sniff of it, and all I smelt was whiskey. And I said that, and he said, that's okay, that's not a problem. Now, I'd like to take the tiniest sip, just a tiny little sip, and keep it in between your bottom lip and your gums, and just hold it there, and just breathe steadily through your nose, and count very slowly to 20. And I thought, this guy's been sampling more of his produce than he should. But I thought, well, he's spending money advertising the radio station, so I will get a bash. So I took this tiny little sip and I counted slowly up to 20. And I think it was about 17 or 18 I got to. And there was just this explosion in my mouth of all these fantastic flavours. I couldn't put my finger on what they were, but bloody hell, that is really, really nice. And I smiled at him because I still had the whiskey in my mouth. I couldn't say, that's nice, or the whiskey would have splattered all over the place. And I smiled at him, and he smiled back, and he says, right, swallow it, but very slowly, just let it go down. And I did. And again, there was another wonderful sensation. And I said, that was lovely, Tom. He says, well, that's the way to drink single malts. You know, this knocking it back is just no use. You have to enjoy the flavour. And what's happening there is the different flavours within the single malt is mixing with your saliva, and it's releasing all the different flavours. And from that day till now, so that's 20 years. I still enjoy my pint of heavy, but increasingly enjoy 2 or 3 drams of single malt.
I love that. And I don't think you're alone at all in maybe coming to it, a little bit later on. I think many people, myself included, try it maybe when, late teenage years or 20s. And it's not the right fit then, but maybe a bit later on, drinking it in that kind of different way and savouring it.
Not to mention, incidentally, the Tam in question from Tam's Drams, the small shop in Finnieston. After a couple of years, Tam was telling us that he was branching out. He was starting to sell some of his bottles abroad. He was auctioning them on the internet, and this was nobody had ever heard of this before. This was a brand new thing. And increasingly over the next year or two, he was having an auction every month, and he was selling more and more and more of these bottles of single malt. And he was getting orders from all over the world because, of course, the internet goes everywhere. So after about a year or so, he closed the little shop down in Finnieston because it was, unnecessary. And he opened a big warehouse, and he's now the proprietor of the biggest whisky auction site in the world. It's called ScotchWhiskeyAuctions.com.
No way! That's so cool. And I love that he started out advertising on rock radio. Inca, I don't know if I've ever mentioned, but I still, when I remember the adverts on rock radio, I'm buckled and I will chuckle away to myself because some of them were like parody ads, weren't they, Tom? And they were like jokes, they were risky jokes. And you would just be driving along in your car and be absolutely buckled at them.
You use the word risky, I would use the word filthy.
They were pretty filthy.
There was one. Do you remember the one about the cider?
Oh, I know, Dickens.
He was a farmer. His name was Dick, and there's nothing he liked better than going home after a hard day's work and getting some Dickens cider. Absolutely filthy.
So filthy and so funny. I don't think we'd get away with that now, but funny times.
Probably not.
I love
Probably not.
that radio show so much. It got me through my work every day.
So I do enjoy a pint of heavy when I go back to Glasgow. But how about whiskies? What's your favorite whiskey, or what kind of whiskies you like to sip at home?
I'm not, even in the 20 years that I've been drinking whiskey, I still struggle a bit with the nose. When I go to whiskey tastings and we'll try something and they'll ask for your opinion on the nose, and I still can't get it. And I mean, something that's peated, yes, obviously I'll smell the peat. Something that's sherried, something like the Glenallachie, the sherry finish of Glenallachie.
Oh, so tasty.
It's a beautiful whiskey. But
Oh,
on the
agree.
nose, you can smell the sherry,
Yeah.
which is fair enough. But some of this, I can smell Christmas cake and all this sort of stuff. But as far as your question, I don't have a particular favourite. I've worked my way through. I like a Macallan 18. I like a Boona, the Aberlour, a Boona. That Glenallachie 14-year-old sherry finish, that is way up, and that's one of my favourites, definitely. I like Old Pulteney, Lagavulin, of course. Edradour's a whiskey I like. Somebody gave me an Edradour for my birthday 2 years ago, I think, and I like that. What else do I like? Glenfarclas. Quite often when you go to the whiskey tastings, they have different Glenfarclases, and they're always good. I've never tasted a bad Glenfarclas.
Yeah, they're quite popular at the moment. Definitely we need to explore a little bit more of that.
Yeah.
Dalmore, the 15-year-old Dalmore I like. Glendronach. What else is there that I like? Springbank. If you can.
Tom, we're loving your style. You're not discriminating. I love it.
Well, Springbank, that's a story all in itself, isn't it? Is it very clever marketing?
We did an episode on them and we were talking about that. We were even talking about their font, weren't we, Inka? That it's like a kind of metal band font on the Springbank bottles.
Maybe we need to ask the other way around. Is there style of whiskey or any whiskey that you're not a huge fan of?
Even when I started 20 years ago, when Tam introduced me to whiskies, first time I tried Laphroaig, second time I tried Laphroaig, probably the first 6 times I tried Laphroaig over a period of weeks and months. I had to force it down. I didn't particularly enjoy it. I was at a whiskey tasting at the Bon Accord a few years ago, and the proprietor there, who sadly passed away just a few weeks ago. I don't know if you'd heard, he died, and his son's taken over. But he was good, and he says, right, I think there was 6 drams we were getting that night, and he says, and I've got a Laphroaig here, and half of the audience sort of moaned. The other half said, "Oh, great." He said, "Wait a minute though. What we're going to do? We're going to leave that till the very end." And he worked his way through with a lovely steak pie first of all, and chips.
Nice.
He worked his way through 5 lovely drams. I don't think there was a bad one amongst it. And then the last one of the night was just a 10-year-old, fairly standard Laphroaig. And strangely enough, that was the first time I enjoyed a Laphroaig. I told him that, and he says that's fairly common. He says the problem is if you take a Laphroaig early in the night, it just destroys your taste buds for anything else.
Yeah, it really does.
So nowadays I enjoy a Laphroaig occasionally. Talisker as well. That's quite a heavily peated one, isn't it? They've got that in my local club, and I sometimes have that as a end of the evening dram.
It's very popular in Italy, so I'm drinking
that
a lot. Yeah. Italians love peat, but especially Talisker, I think it's just so widely available here.
Right.
Rock and metal and whiskey go hand in hand. And on the podcast, we have previously interviewed Rob Dietrich, the master blender and distiller from Blackened American Whiskey, which is Metallica's whiskey, basically. And we both really enjoyed that one. And in another episode, we also reviewed Rammstein's whiskey, as well as Bob Dylan's one and one from the Scorpions, which all 3 weren't not necessarily that good. But we wondered what do you think about brands collaborating with whiskey or spirit brands? Have you tried any, or do you have any feelings about this?
To be perfectly honest, I was aware of the Metallica one. I wasn't aware of the Rammstein the Scorpions, or indeed Bob Dylan. I wasn't aware of either of them.
Well, Bob Dylan's was like just nasty on the palate. The Scorpions totally let me down because I've got a soft spot for the
Yeah.
Scorpions. And Ramstein was expensive and took ages to be delivered. And I was sorely disappointed with that as well. And we're not usually like super critical. There's always usually, one or two we enjoy. But just that episode, they were just all epic fails, weren't they?
Yeah. Scorpions was okay, but it wasn't didn't rock my world.
As far as an idea is concerned, I think it's a great idea. It's great. It's spreading the word about the delights of and a good Scotch whisky. It's also perhaps introducing the liquid to a younger audience.
Unleash the peat.
Before this episode, I hadn't really tried many Bowmores, I'll be honest. So this is my kind of first dive into tasting, a few more of them. What about yourself, Inca? Are you that very familiar with Bowmore?
Not so much. I've just seen a lot of mixed reviews of them. And obviously we tried the 18-year-old. That was the Aston Martin collaboration. That's probably the only one that I really remember that I've tried.
We do a kind of tasting a wee bit later on in the episode, Tom, and we'll sort of, talk about what we get in the nose and all of our different notes. But it's totally fine if there's not much that you're noticing at the moment. But we thought it would be really nice to share a dram with you and just have a wee sip. And then if you enjoyed it or just any thoughts on it. So what one have you poured at the moment?
Well, I thought it'd be sensible to start with a 12.
Fantastic. That medium peated 12-year-old, and that's bottled at 40% ABV.
Tom, have you tried Bowmore whiskies before?
I have. I haven't ever bought a bottle, but I have over the years. The Pot Still in Glasgow or the Bonaccord.
So what are you thinking about this 12-year-old?
It smells like whiskey. Sorry.
For sure. No, love it.
I think the mouthfeel was a bit softer than I was expecting to be. Feels a little bit creamier.
Creamy, gentle, going down.
Yeah. I was thinking like dandelion, because they're quite creamy.
Oh, yeah. I think for me, it's a wee bit kind of florally, not super sweet, but a tiny wee bit florally. It's going down quite easily, though. It's nicely balanced.
Yeah, I think it's better than I was expecting.
I just put a wee spot of water in it there just to see what it does.
And do you tend to enjoy your jams with a wee spot of water?
Sorry, I've just counted to 20 there.
Oh, fantastic. Brilliant.
Not always. To answer your question, that 12-year-old, without the water, I found quite strong, but lovely taste. Tiny spot of water in it, and it's less fiery.
So yeah, whiskies from Bowmore Distillery are usually known smoky, sea salty, with some tropical fruit character in there and with like a little bit of a citrusy edge. And I think some sometimes mention Parma violets as well as a common character in the Bowmore whiskies. Let's go to the next one, the 15-year-old, which is matured in bourbon casks, followed by 3 years in Oloroso sherry casks. And this one is 43% ABV.
I like the colour of this one. It draws me right in.
Reddish, treacle, amber.
Yeah, and just talking of like Glenlivet, nice sherried whiskies earlier kind of got me in the mood for that. So I've got high hopes of this nice sherry cask and the nice colour on this one.
I agree with you, Jennifer, about the colour. It's a lovely dark. You stand the two bottles next to each other, it's quite a comparison.
Definitely.
Yeah, that's definitely the Oloroso influence there. The first one was just American oak.
Oh, I'm enjoying this one on first sip.
Put my nose in and taking a deep breath, a big sniff, and I can smell sherry. So that's nice. I can't smell whiskey, I can smell sherry.
I really like the sherry notes on the nose. I just think, I don't know, it just makes me feel warm and fuzzy and comforted inside like a big hug.
I was getting more red berries and like black currants.
Oh, nice.
And a little bit of rubber as well at the beginning. Or like balloons or something, when we talked about that before.
Yeah.
It's a bit more spicier palate than the previous one.
I'm getting a nice wee zing of spice.
I was even thinking juniper. How are you finding it, Tom?
I'd buy a bottle of that. It's lovely.
Good.
It's very
That's
nice.
the best compliment.
Absolutely, if you'd go for a bottle of that. On the taste, I'm thinking of the smell of lovely worn leather. Maybe I'm just thinking leather jackets with all this rock and metal chat. But I'm definitely getting notions of that with this one. But you know how sometimes you can drink a whiskey and the taste will remind you of the smell of something? If that
Yeah,
doesn't
yeah. I think the beauty of whiskey is exactly those memories, how it really can put you in that moment. Tom, do you ever get anything like that? Do you try the whiskey and it really takes you back to a certain place?
Every now and again, I'll just be sitting and lovely memories from years gone by will just pop into my head without a whiskey. Even if I'm just sitting with a cup of tea. You know, you get to that age where you look back. I've had a fairly eventful and lucky life. And sometimes it's nice you just sit, yes, with a whiskey in hand if need be. And some lovely memories come back. Oh, I remember that. And I remember this and I remember that. Incidentally, that Bowmore there, the second one, the 15, there's a lovely aftertaste, and I've noticed.
A nice long finish just lingering away there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's quite, I think there's something floral in the finish as well. Maybe lavender or something. I don't know. I couldn't really put my finger on it, but something delicate.
I think I could drink too much of the 15 too quickly because that is juicy and delicious. Okay, last but not least, the Bowmore 18-year-old, and it's again bottled at 43% ABV.
While you sip and nose, here's a little fun fact for you about the name Bowmore.
Hit us with a fun fact, Inka.
Some historians believe that the name Bowmore to be derived from a small black reef just outside Lochindal, whilst others reference Bogamore, the Norse for sunken rock, as its origin.
Oh, Norse for sunken rock. That's pretty cool.
So rock or black reef, but no one is really sure.
I love the origin of the names and things. It just conjures up those images of times gone by.
Yeah, and don't you think with Islay as well, as a location, you just think of, there's kind of islands in Scotland anyway. You think kind of rocky, black reefs, loads of waves hitting the coast.
Definitely.
Last year, we were on holiday down, we were going on a cruise. So we drove down the day before. We'll make a night of it. So I had booked a hotel in the Cotswolds. I'd never been to the Cotswolds, but I'd heard the Cotswolds was lovely. So we got there, checked in, and then had a wander about the town and stumbled across a distillery or a distillery shop. I am a wee bit, I refuse to drink Japanese whiskey or, Portuguese whiskey or New Zealand whiskey or Chinese whiskey. It's one of the few things that we Scots are world leaders in.
You like to stay Scottish.
And I like to maybe been snobbish about it. I don't know.
Sure.
I like to talk about Scottish whiskey. But this particular story, I went in and it's a fairly small shop. They only had about 3 or 4 different whiskies on display and then some miniatures and the young lady behind the counter, and I chatted away and I said, I'll give it a try. I'll take one of your miniatures. It was £4.99. So it goes into my wallet and pulls out a Scottish £5 note, handed it over, and she looked at me as if I had suddenly grown 2 heads.
No, I hate when that happens.
So bad.
That happens all the time.
But I thought it was because it was a Scottish £5 note, but it wasn't. She said, "We don't take cash."
No way!
What?
And my immediate reaction was, "Oh well, you can stick your Cotswold whiskey where the sun doesn't shine." And I was about to walk out, and then I thought, "Oh no, it's a bit unfair. It's not the girl's fault." So I pulled out my credit card, bought the miniature for £4.99, and went back out to the car, and we headed to Southampton and got on board the ship for our cruise. That night or the next night, I pulled out the little quarter bottle, the little miniature, and I sampled it, and it was damn good. I hate to say it, but it was very, very good. I'm not promoting it at all, and I'll probably never mention it again. English whiskey, but I must admit it was nice.
Oh, was it the sherry one, or do you remember?
I can't.
Because we tried the sherry one and we thought it was very nice as well, very funky. There was some unusual tasting notes there.
It probably would have been the sherry one because, as I mentioned earlier, I tend to like the sherry finish in a whiskey.
And that's the first time we'd featured an English whiskey just quite recently, wasn't it,
Yeah.
Inca? And I must admit, I didn't expect to enjoy it as much as I did, so that's brilliant.
But we'll not be promoting it, will we?
No, we're talking about Bowmore today.
For sure.
Yes.
So how are you guys finding this 18-year-old?
I'm just sniffing it now because I was blethering for too long there. So
I'm not getting as much from it on the nose as I did from the 15. It's pleasant, it's nice, it's gone down beautifully. But I was that excited by the 15. I'm underwhelmed by the 18, so I need to spend a bit more time. I need to spend a bit more time on it before we fully review it later.
Oh, I was getting a lot of like berry notes, like berry compote and like cherry jam or that kind of stuff. A little bit of some random wet wood in there as well. That's quite nice.
Don't get me wrong, it's gone down really easily. It's creamy. It's pretty tasty. I would not be sad at all if I was gifted a bottle of this.
I think it's much more floral and more perfumed on the palate. It's like quite a strong peaty, iodine, salty kind of hit.
The colour's something kind of in between the 12 and the 15, isn't it? Something in the middle, not quite as dark as that sherry cask finish, but certainly darker than the 12.
I'm quite surprised by Bowmore. I don't know, because I've read so many bad reviews recently, so I was really not expecting to like this.
Well, I didn't really like the one we tasted. What was the one with the car, Inca, again?
Yeah, that was 18. That was with the collaboration with the Aston Martin.
The collaboration with Aston Martin. I was underwhelmed by that, but I'm actually really enjoying these three. I don't want to ask Tom again and interrupt his awesome counting of tasting. So you can just take your time, Tom. No rush.
It's lovely. I agree with you that when I sniffed it, I missed the sherry of the 15. It was a little bit more, it just smelled like whiskey. But the taste is lovely. I think it's perhaps a more complex whiskey. As I held it in my mouth there was different flavours coming. And then I would move it and then swallow it. And there was different explosions of flavour. So I think that the 18 is probably one that I would get very used to. The 15 I loved straight away. It was just beautiful, and as I said, I would buy a bottle of that, no problem. But the 18 I think is definitely a grower.
I think the 18 is much more peatier than the other two.
Still a gently peat though, not an in your face, punchy in the face Lafroig peat, would you say, Inca?
No, it's not like medicinal, but it's definitely more salty, more kind of
more savoury edge and would say a long finish again.
Yeah, slightly herbal on the finish.
I wouldn't kick the 12 out of bed either. It's quite nice, although it has been overshadowed. But if somebody bought me a dram, I'd be quite grateful.
Absolutely. I won't reveal my favourite yet. I think I need to still keep trying before we do our dram on fire tasting notes later on.
We'll stick our noses in again and get busy with those. And we can maybe keep having a wee sip as we chat on, because we would absolutely love to know, although you have met like people that would just blow our brains. We'd be like Wayne and Garth. I'm not worthy. When they meet Alice Cooper. But if you could, we call it Dream Dram, and that's which celebrity, dead or alive, would you share a whiskey with? And what whiskey would you choose to share?
Dream Dram.
Oh, that's a hard one, Jennifer.
It is. It's a tough one.
Can I give you three?
Oh yes, please.
Elton John. Only interviewed him once. Again, it was in London, and it was fascinating. I don't know if he drinks or not, but I asked him a question during the first 5 minutes of the interview. He was a bit stiff. You know, he was probably the 20th interview of the day that he had done. We all tend to ask similar questions to get things off and running. I've tried very hard not to ask all the obvious questions.
Yeah.
I've tried to ask questions that the artist would be interested in answering.
Exactly.
So after about 5 or 10 minutes, I could actually see in his face, Elton John's face, that he was warming to me and warming to the interview because I was asking him interesting ones. I said to him, I can't remember the year, probably the late 70s, Elton, and you brought an album out. Was it Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, double album, and you followed that with Captain Fantastic and the Brown Duck Cowboy. And when you toured, you played the Glasgow Apollo, sold it out in so many hours, so they added a second show the same night. Now, at that time, Elton did a 2.5-hour show. So I remember I couldn't get a ticket for the first show. It was on 7:30 till 10 o'clock or something. But I had a ticket for the second show, starting at 11.
That's cool.
So I says, do you remember that you did 5 hours in one night? And he looked and he says, I'm sorry, I have absolutely no memory of that whatsoever. But I'll be speaking to my manager about it. And then I said, that album, or these two albums, some of the songwriting on it is fantastic. What's your memories about writing these two songs? And again, he looked me straight in the eye and he said, I'm really sorry, Tom. I have absolutely no memories at all of that period in my life.
Wow.
I was waking up in the morning and I was drinking a bottle of vodka. I was taking pills all day, and then before I went to bed at night, I was drinking another bottle of spirits. It was just, the whole thing was a blur, and until I realised that I was going to die. That was quite poignant. You know, the fact that all these wonderful songs that he'd written at that period, and he had no memory at all of writing them. So Elton would be one. Ozzy obviously would be another.
Yes.
I can't resist it. And who else? As I mentioned earlier, I've been very, very lucky to interview so many different people. Robert Plant 4 or 5 times. But Jimmy Page, I've never met. Never interviewed, never met Jimmy. And Jimmy Page from Led Zeppelin, I would love to have done an interview just talking about his technique and his, his influence from the old blues musicians, and that would have been nice. And one final one, Jimi Hendrix. I would love to have interviewed Jimi Hendrix.
Oh,
fantastic.
Amazing choices. And I just love Led Zeppelin so much. Excellent. So actually, I have another tough question for you. Which 3 sipping songs would you choose to go with this evening of sipping whiskey with these people?
Sipping songs.
Yes.
Do they have to have a connection to whiskey, or just
no,
songs?
Just any song just to set the mood for the sipping evening.
AC/DC, Highway to Hell.
Yes.
Ozzy Osbourne, No More Tears.
Nice.
And I'll tell you why on that one. The time that I was at the bar, I mentioned earlier at the barbecue at his house, a Sunday afternoon. It wasn't a wild party. I mean, there was drink there, but it was more it was just a Sunday afternoon barbecue for friends and family.
It wasn't one of his craziest moments, like his
was
tour
not.
with Motley Crue.
No. He was quite calm, but at one stage in the afternoon, he says, Tommy, you got a minute? Of course, I said, aye. So he took me round the back of the house to the stables. He went round his neck and he had a key attached to a chain round his neck. And he says, this is the one room that Sharon doesn't get into. This is my den, my man cave. So we opened this door and we went into what had been the stables, and it had been converted into a man cave. There was a snooker table, and there was a big PA system, and a huge big television, and a bar, of course. And he sat me down and he pulled out it was actually a cassette at that time. And he says, I'd like your opinion, your professional opinion, Tom. We've got a new album coming out in a couple of months. And one of the tracks from the album, I really think would be a good single. Got a lot of airplay. I'd like to play it for you and then ask you a question. I says, fine, no problem. So he played me this track, and it went on for about 7 minutes. It was quite a long track, but it was astonishing. It was terrific. And when it finished, he said, right, I want the record company to release that as a single. It's 7 minutes long, but the record company say they want to edit it to make it 4 minutes long because it's got no chance of getting any plays on the radio. It's 7 minutes long. What do you think as a DJ on the radio? And I thought for a moment and I said, well, let's be honest, Ozzy. Radio 1 and all the pop stations up and down the country, are they going to play it even if it's 1 minute long? Ozzy Osbourne, the program controllers would have a heart attack rather than play an Ozzy Osbourne, rather than play any hard rock song on the radio. So I said, well, you make it 4 minutes long, you're still not going to get play. So leave it, the 7 minutes, leave it as it is.
Definitely.
And he says, thank you for that, Tom. We'll see what happens. And then about 3 months later, the single came out and it was 7 minutes long and it was called No More Tears.
How cool is that? That is the coolest thing I've ever heard.
It never got played on the radio apart from a few rock shows up and down the country. But,
Did you play it?
Of course I've played it. What do you think, Jennifer?
Come on. Oh, that's brilliant. And I'm guessing felt quite an honour to be brought in and for him to share it in that way in his home and, and ask for your advice.
Mm-hmm. It was humbling. So many of these things, Jennifer, honestly, I've been so lucky in my career. And as I say, sometimes I just sit back and relax and think, I've had a bloody good life. One more.
We're going to pin you down for one more. We're not going to let you away with two.
Right. This is one that maybe a little bit, you know how rock and metal, there's so many little strands. There's funk rock, there's progressive rock, there's heavy metal, there's thrash, there's blues. There's so many different strands. And I love most of them. A lot of people just like prog rock. They've got no time for metal. A lot of people like thrash, but they've got no time for anything else.
Yes.
A lot of people just like the blues. Me, I'm just a weirdo. I like most of it. And prog rock made a sort of comeback back in the 80s when I was... It was big in the 70s, and then it became very unfashionable and faded away. But in the 80s, it made a bit of a comeback. Mainly British artists, and one of them had a Scottish singer who I got on very well with, smashing big fella. And there was a particular track that they recorded. I think it was on either their second or third album, can't quite remember. But the song is Fugazi, Fugazi. And I just loved this song so much. I played it every bloody Friday night on the Rock Show Clyde for weeks. And it's about 7 minutes as well, six minutes on. And I love the song so much. Round about that time of the 80s, I had got married and we'd moved into our first house. And we decided to call the house Fugazi after this song. 10 years later, I was divorced.
Who's the artist?
Oh, did I forget to mention that? Marillion.
Oh, no way. I wasn't that I've heard it, but I didn't know, I couldn't link it to the artist. Yeah.
Have a listen to the song, dig it out and have a listen. It's a brilliant song. The lyric goes that the whole world is totally fugazi. And I asked Fish, what does that mean? He says, oh, it's Vietnamese. I said, oh, right. Oh. He says, back in the 60s, during the Vietnam War, all the Vietnamese used to say this to the Americans, Fugazi, 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 Fugazi. It basically means all effed up.
That is brilliant. And I love that you called your house by the same name. Oh, your career has been epic, and you've said a few times how lucky you've been, but you've created your career, and it sounds like you've developed brilliant relationships with those that you've interviewed. And we just want to thank you again, Tom, for taking the time and sharing some of your experiences and stories, both with whiskey and in the music world. It's been such a pleasure. And I've just got about 300 questions now I want to ask you about music, but I suppose we better let you go.
Jennifer and Inca, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you. I've enjoyed it. Even more, I've enjoyed the whiskies.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so, so much, Tom.
Whisky Sisters, the podcast. Dram on fire.
So just to chat a little more in detail about these releases, again, let's begin with the 12-year-old. Is there anything you'd like to add from our previous conversation with Tom?
I was just quite excited to be dramming with Tom, so I've not got too much more to add, Inca. But I guess the nose, the nose super pleasant, but I was struggling for really, accurate descriptives, but I kind of got a mellow vanilla custard and then a wee bit more caramelly. Super pleasant, but I didn't get much more than that.
I was getting heather, some honey. It also felt a little bit dusty or kind of like a wet soil or like damp leaves, that kind of probably that warehouse.
Yeah.
There was also kind of like a bottom of an ashtray.
Oh.
Like you're emptying the ashtray, but you haven't cleaned the ashtray, so it still kind of smells of that kind of.
So not so much a rock and roll echo of ashtray, but a bit more of a scabby dog. Oh my God, that's bokeh ashtray.
I didn't find it like disgusting. It's just like you walk by an ashtray and it kind of gives you a little.
Okay, it just gives you a little something, but it's not super disgusting.
Yeah, it wasn't like that too bad. So it was interesting. It didn't give me too much, I guess, on the nose. It wasn't bad, but it was okay.
I think I might be coming down with some sort of like nose and throat thing. So you'll need to be the lead. You need to be the boss of this tasting.
All right. On the palate, first of all, I was quite surprised how soft the mouthfeel felt.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was getting kind of creaminess, like dandelion, buttery mashed potatoes.
Oh.
Melted butter, like salty melted butter, some salted nuts, a little bit of oak and citrus in there as well. And also kind of sweet candied orange or some sort of citrus later on.
Ah, super interesting. I've not got much kind of similarity in my notes, but as I'm listening to you, I'm really interested in that butteriness. I have got a shortbread, maybe a bit of a white pepper spice. And the fruitiness, I was thinking pear, but pears when they're almost not very ripe and there's they're fresh and crunchy and slightly not sour, but they're not super sweet, kind of like that.
Mm-hmm.
Got a woodiness on the finish.
Yeah, I was getting a bit of woodiness and it was kind of drying finish, I think. Like I mentioned before, I was surprised how much I actually enjoyed it. It's like, it's not my favorite whiskey, but I wouldn't mind sipping this
for
every once in a while.
Definitely.
The reviews been mixed overall, the ones that I've seen in the past. Maybe because I was expecting not to like it. It then surprised me because it wasn't actually bad at all. With the salted nuts, by the way, I was and the saltiness, I think that's the peat. Okay, so how about the next one, the Bowmore 15? Because you really liked that earlier, didn't you?
For sure, I really liked it. And I'm looking at the colour again now. That colour is just, so nice. Almost kind of a peachy caramel colour.
Yeah, it really is.
On more of a sip, I can get, there's building works near me. Sorry, listeners in Inca, if you can hear that in the distance. Do you not know I'm sipping a Bowmore 15? Selfish.
Yeah.
Interrupting my whiskeying, my sticking my nose in it. On the nose, red berries, definitely a big mixture. Maybe some nice soft Madeira sponge cake, orange zest, caramelized orange. And I was also thinking of Highland toffee, but all melted and soft.
Yeah, definitely red berries. And I'm getting really heavy swift of black currant.
Whiffs.
Yeah.
Whiffs. Cool. You could get swift whiffs.
Yeah. Yeah, so very fruity. If you're cooking certain type of dishes, you soak fruits in alcohol to get the flavor before you put them in the food. So I'm getting that kind of, there's a bowl of something soaking in some brandy.
Absolutely. I feel it's kind of punchy, not as in fruit, not as in alcohol punchy as in like its personality, and as if it's kind of showing off, like it's giving a lot on the nose.
So the palate, again, I think is salty, gingery, spice, baking spices,
Yeah.
burnt toffee. I mentioned the juniper earlier. And again, those black currants from the nose are really transferring on the palate very strongly for me, which I
Nice.
love because I'm just massive black currant fan. Finland for me.
Oh, that's lovely. I think in the UK anyway, like they're a lesser revered fruit. And I think that's not, it shouldn't be the case because they are so tasty. I definitely get the sort of citrusy, warming spices, like a nice Thai food salad dressing.
Mm-hmm.
And there's sometimes like citrusy spice in the dressings.
Like lemongrass as well.
Exactly. That kind of like zesty, spicy, warming, but still a freshness to it. And then I was just like super enjoying it, but struggling to describe it. And I just kept getting excitement. So I'm not sure what else on the palate.
Yeah, I think the finish was kind of oaky and slightly drying, not as dry as the previous one. And I'm also getting red fruits and some delicate floral notes, like I mentioned, the lavender or something like that. I couldn't really figure out what it was, but just some, or like even like, berries have flowers that kind of smell nice, or something like that.
Super nice. And as I said before, the taste of the smell of nice worn leather and that kind of lingering on that long finish. Super nice. Like a rock song that you love and a leather jacket that you love that you take off and the elbow shape is still in the jacket.
Yeah.
Oh, so good.
That's a proper leather one. The 18-year-old. Yeah, I think this one maybe had a slightly slower legs. Again, it was giving me red berry compote, cherry jam, some wet wood in there. I was thinking I made this blackberry and blackcurrant and thyme Negroni a while ago.
Wow.
And it was giving me that smell, that kind of berry thyme, but the bitterness of Campari and a Negroni, that kind of, and the sweet vermouth.
Oh my God, amazing.
And then I was also getting kind of cinnamony and nutty coffee cake.
I found it quite mixed on the nose. Like initially I was like, oh, it's like fresh fruity salad, with all its own fruit juice. Then I was like, oh, I'm getting wee caramel notes. But I actually get something a little bit fermented. And then I thought, is that a wet umbrella? But not quite as bad as that. But something just a wee bit funky.
Yeah, but that's the thing. I was getting something wet as well, like the wet wood or something. I don't know what it was.
Yeah, something's been rained on here.
Well, it's kind of good to just indicate the special warehouse again.
Oh yeah, true, very true. And
so, kind of very damp environment.
You've got a totally sexy nose description. What about the palette for the 18?
Iodine. I love it. And it was kind of floral perfumed. Like, okay, I was then thinking those Parma violets or like a violet. Again, berry jam. There's definitely berry team cross here. Definitely peat, coastal and coastal pebbles. Pebbles? Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Like on the beach,
That's such a good shout. And I can really get the iodine as I'm sipping and hearing your notes. This is maybe a ridiculous tasting note, but when I was sipping it earlier, I got boiled cabbage with black pepper on top and then sweet salty butter through it.
Oh my God, that is so true. Now that you said it, and I literally just took a sip, that makes so much sense. My mom used to always be on this cabbage diet and she would make the cabbage soup with black pepper and stuff, and the whole house would smell for weeks.
All the crazy diets of like the 1980s and 90s.
Yeah. It does taste like cabbagey, actually.
Yeah, there's something cabbagey going on. Maybe a wee bit of oatiness. And you know how oat cakes give you that kind of like creamy mouthfeel, but it's like savoury and oaty. And just what I was saying about like the wet earlier on, like growing up in Scotland, there's a lot of rain, right? And you come in and sometimes the houses I lived in, you'd have a wee porch or a wee bit in the hall where all the rain jacket and your Wellington boots would go and you would shove your wet stuff. So the lobby or the hall would smell a wee bit kind of wet and of outsidiness.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of getting Scottish lobby after the rain. I found it a wee bit citrusy though on the finish.
There's definitely some more like lemon rather than orange.
Yes, agree.
So would you still say that the 15 is your favorite?
Oh, yes. All the way. What about you? Because you were teasing us earlier. You weren't going to unleash your favourite.
Oh, I don't know. The 15 or the 18, probably the 15 on balance. I would say maybe, but I would happily spend a little bit more time on with the 18 as well.
I think as well, that kind of funkiness and outdoorness is very suited to your, like, part of your palate as well, isn't it, Inka?
Yeah. Comparing this to some other Islay whiskies, I think this feels more lightly peated compared
Yeah,
to
for sure. Most
other ones.
definitely. And if I was doing a blind tasting, I wouldn't guess this was an Islay whiskey. Can I
Maybe.
just say,
Mm.
but are you not potentially so excited because you shared the Bowmores with the legend that is Tom Russell, Inka?
I know that was a very special occasion for sure.
Very, very special. We feel very honoured to have that time with Tom. And I just wanted to ask him so many questions about all the famous people he's met. Do you know he's met Lemmy from Motorhead?
Yeah, amazing.
So amazing.
Whisky Sisters Whisky Fact.
In 1991, one of Bowmore's warehouses was turned into a community swimming pool, which is heated with the distillery's recycled hot water. And I actually checked, this swimming pool is still in operation and the leisure center is open to non-residents as well. So if you're ever visiting the distillery on Islay, you can go and have a nice swim in the warm pool too.
That is so cool.
And while we're talking about Bowmore, make sure to visit the round church in Bowmore. And if you're wondering why it's round and not rectangular or square one, the story goes that the church was built in a circular shape to keep the devil from hiding in a corner.
Good plan. Not today, Satan.
Hi there, I'm Tom Russell, the Godfather of Rock, and you're listening to the Whisky Sisters podcast.
Well, next week's episode won't be as good as this week's. I'm just calling it out because Tom Russell isn't in it. So it's not going to be as good. But if you still love us and want more, we will be back with none other than supermarket whiskies. Oh yeah, baby. We are getting our trolleys at the ready. We are counting our pennies, not too many of them. We've come across some random Scotch whisky on the supermarket shelves and names that might not be that easily recognised. And that's what we'll be focusing in on next week.
Yes, so we will be sampling cheap and cheerful bottles. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know whether to be excited. I'm kind of curious, I have to say. I'm very curious.
Are you a little bit scared?
Yeah, a little bit.
Follow us on Instagram and follow Tom Russell on Instagram at whiskysisters.podcast. X, I still don't like that. At Whisky Sisters and Facebook at Whisky Sisters Podcasts.
May your glass be full and your dram on fire.